The Rotterdam Puzzle. Part 1, The Cryptic Invitation. Section 1/. Beginning. The afternoon sunlight filtered gently through the curtains of Hercule Poirot's immaculate London apartment, turning the room into a soft golden chamber. Everything inside, every vase, every book, every chair, was set with mathematical precision. And at the center of this perfect order sat Poirot himself, grooming his magnificent moustache with the same reverence a general might give to his medals. On the opposite chair, Captain Hastings flipped casually through a newspaper, sighing now and then with the boredom of a man who dearly missed adventure. "I say, Poirot," Hastings muttered, "isn't it dreadfully quiet these days? Not a single robbery, scandal, or mysterious poisoning. Almost feels unnatural." Poirot glanced at him with amusement. "Mon ami, quiet days are good for the soul. They allow the little grey cells to rest." Hastings snorted. "Your grey cells don't rest. They only sleep lightly like a cat." "Cats," Poirot declared, "are creatures of great intelligence, Hastings. You should aspire." A sharp knock interrupted him. Both men turned. Poirot's brows arched delicately. "Ah. You see, Hastings. The universe cannot bear to leave Hercule Poirot idle." Hastings folded the newspaper as Poirot rose and walked to the door. A uniformed courier stood outside, holding a thick white envelope sealed with red wax. "For Mr. Hercule Poirot," the courier said. Poirot took it with a polite nod. "A thousand thanks, monsieur." The courier departed, leaving an atmosphere of faint suspense hanging in the hallway. Poirot examined the envelope. "No return address," he murmured. "But the wax, see how clean. How deliberate. Someone who likes precision." Hastings leaned forward. "Open it." Poirot broke the seal. Inside were 3 items. A folded letter. A torn slip of paper, bearing a strange riddle. A small train ticket, London to Rotterdam, dated November 14th. Poirot unfolded the letter first. Elegant handwriting stretched across the page. "Monsieur Poirot. You do not know me. But Rotterdam is in grave danger. A crime will be committed, unless you arrive before the 14th. I cannot sign my name. The first clue. When the river carries secrets, the truth sinks first. A friend." Hastings frowned. "That's not very helpful. Why do they always send you riddles instead of proper explanations?" Poirot lifted a finger. "Because, Hastings, those who play games with death rarely speak plainly." He unfolded the second paper. The riddle was handwritten in darker ink. "Look beneath the waterline. Where silence holds the crimes of men." Poirot tapped his lips. This is beginning to smell, as you English say, fishy." "Quite literally. Rotterdam is a city of ports, ships, cold warehouses, an ideal location for hidden dealings. And someone clearly wants you there," Hastings said. "But who?" Poirot paced thoughtfully. "Someone who fears a disaster, yet cannot talk openly. Someone with enemies. Perhaps someone in the shipping trade." Hastings looked suspiciously at the train ticket. "You're not actually planning to go, are you?" Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming. "But of course." Section 2/. Arrival in Rotterdam. Rotterdam Central Station bustled with life the next morning. Trains hissed, whistles echoed, and crowds surged through the bright hall like a river of motion. Poirot stepped off the train wearing a perfectly tailored dark coat, while Hastings carried their luggage with a half-complaining expression. "Good Lord, this place is modern," Hastings said, staring at the towering glass roof. Poirot nodded approvingly. "The Dutch, Hastings, are people of industry and order. I appreciate such qualities." They hailed a taxi to the address mentioned in the letter, Van Leeuwen House, home of Samuel Van Leeuwen, a wealthy shipping magnate reputed for controlling a large portion of Rotterdam's harbor trade. But when they arrived at the gates of the mansion, a dark, elegant house facing the river Maas, an uneasy silence hung in the air. A grim-faced butler opened the door. "You are Monsieur Poirot?" he asked quietly. "I am he," Poirot replied. "I believe Mr. Van Leeuwen wished to see me." The butler hesitated, then lowered his gaze. "Sir, Mr. Van Leeuwen cannot meet you." Poirot stiffened. "And why is that, if you please?" The butler's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because, he is dead." Hastings gasped. "Dead? But he wrote to us." Poirot's face hardened. "When did this happen?" 2 hours ago, sir," the butler said. "At the Rotterdam waterfront. They say it was an accident, but—" Poirot raised a hand. "No. Do not say it. Let me guess." He looked out toward the distant water, gleaming silver beneath the evening sky. "He died," Poirot said softly, "in the very place where secrets sink." Part 2, Death on the Waterfront. Section 1/. The Body by the River. The Rotterdam waterfront stretched out like a steel-gray serpent under the fading light. Huge cranes hunched over cargo containers, ships drifted along the river Maas, and the cold wind carried a sharp smell of diesel and salt. The entire harbor seemed to pulse with machinery, commerce, and secrets. Poirot and Hastings arrived at Pier 17, the site of Samuel Van Leeuwen's death. Police tape fluttered in the wind. Officers stood in clusters, speaking quietly, glancing occasionally toward a sheet-covered body lying near the edge of the dock. Inspector Willem de Vries, a tall Dutchman with a stern jaw and a heavy coat, stepped forward to greet them. "You must be Hercule Poirot," he said. "Not a question, more like an acknowledgement. I was told you would come. Though I did not expect you quite this soon." Poirot adjusted his gloves. "When a man writes to me and then dies before I arrive, Inspector, I tend to take such matters seriously." Hastings shivered. "It's freezing out here." Inspector de Vries ignored him. He led them toward the body. Samuel Van Leeuwen's face was pale, his eyes half open, staring at the steel beams rising above the harbor sky. His coat was damp. One shoe was missing. There were bruises on his hands, defensive bruises. De Vries spoke low. "He was found at the water's edge. Witnesses say he slipped. Hit his head on the pier. Fell into the water. Drowned." Poirot crouched beside the body, peering closely. "A man does not obtain defensive wounds by slipping, Inspector." De Vries frowned. "You're saying?" Poirot nodded. "Mais oui. This was no accident." He pointed to Van Leeuwen's wrist. "A rope burn. Someone grabbed him. Someone strong. He fought." Hastings muttered, "Good Lord." Poirot stood, brushing his hands together. "And look there, Inspector, on the ground beside the body." A small metal object glinted near the dock edge. De Vries bent down and picked it up. It was a brass navigation pin, like those used on maritime charts. "Harbor captains use these," De Vries said. "But so do smugglers." Poirot smiled grimly. "Smugglers, yes. Rotterdam has many shadows, Inspector." He tilted his head toward the water. "And see the marks on the pier, heel marks, sliding. Someone dragged him, but not into the water. No. Someone wanted it to appear as though he fell." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Samuel Van Leeuwen was murdered." Section 2/. The symbol. De Vries led them inside a nearby warehouse, a temporary office the police were using. Inside, on a table under a harsh lamp, lay all items found on the victim. Wallet. Keys. A broken watch. His notebook. And one particularly odd item. A folded paper with a symbol drawn in thick black ink. Poirot carefully unfolded it. The symbol was a circle, divided by a diagonal slash. Beneath it were 3 tiny waves, drawn like the sea. Hastings squinted. What's that supposed to be? A code? De Vries sighed. No one knows. But it was in Van Leeuwen's coat. He had circled it twice in pencil. Poirot's expression sharpened with interest. Oh, but I have seen such symbols before, Inspector. They are used by those who transport goods, goods that should not be transported. You mean smugglers? Hastings asked. Poirot nodded. Certain smuggling rings identify themselves with symbols instead of letters or names. This one, the circle crossed, it appears in old maritime cases. De Vries crossed his arms. You know more about this symbol than I do. Poirot patted his chest. But of course. The little grey cells never forget. He turned the paper over. Something was faintly scratched on the back. A number, 47. And a location, Basin E. Hastings looked confused. What's Basin E? De Vries answered, a restricted docking area. Only certain ships are allowed there. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And perhaps one of those ships holds the answer to our mystery. Section 3 / The witness. A police constable rushed in. Inspector. A witness has come forward. A dock worker. Says he saw something last night. De Vries nodded. Bring him. A man in oil-stained overalls entered nervously. He removed his cap and held it in both hands. Poirot stepped closer. You saw Monsieur Van Leeuwen last night? The man swallowed hard. Yes, sir. I saw him with someone. With someone? Hastings echoed. Who? The worker wrung his cap. I don't know the man's name, but I've seen him before. Tall. Wore a grey coat. Always hanging around Basin E night shifts. Poirot leaned in. Did they argue? Oh yes. Mr. Van Leeuwen was angry. He said something like, you'll ruin everything if you go through with this. And the other man said, you should have stayed out of it. Poirot's brows lifted. And then? They moved out of sight behind a stack of containers. I heard a struggle. A thud. And then, silence. Hastings whispered, that's when he died. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, monsieur. You have been of great help. But as the dock worker left, Poirot's gaze drifted back to the drawn symbol. A circle. A slash. 3 waves. He touched his mustache thoughtfully. A warning, he murmured. A sign used by those who wish to remain unseen. Part 3, The House of Van Leeuwen. Section 1 / The Family of Shadows. The Van Leeuwen mansion stood tall and brooding against the grey Rotterdam sky. Its dark stone facade was touched with age, and ivy climbed the walls like green veins. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, a house mourning a powerful man. Poirot and Hastings were ushered into a long drawing room where the family had gathered in anticipation. There were 3 people. Evelyn Van Leeuwen, the widow. A graceful woman in her mid-40s with tired eyes and a cold composure. Adrian Van Leeuwen, the son. Tall, sharp-faced, impatient, tapping his foot as though he resented every second of this intrusion. Clara Van Leeuwen, the daughter. Quiet, pale, with trembling hands, as if the world had recently collapsed around her. Inspector de Vries introduced the visitors. This is Monsieur Hercule Poirot. He is investigating your husband's death. Evelyn stiffened. Investigating? Why? The police said Samuel slipped. A tragic accident. Poirot bowed gently. Madam, I regret to say, your husband did not slip. He was pushed. Silence. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, shock flickering in her eyes. Clara gasped. Adrian's foot stopped tapping. Adrian spoke first. Are you implying murder? In our family? No, Poirot replied calmly. I imply nothing. I seek only truth. Section 2/ Evelyn Van Leeuwen, the widow. Poirot invited Evelyn to sit. She obeyed stiffly. Madam, Poirot said softly, what was your husband working on before his death? Evelyn hesitated. Samuel kept many things to himself. Business matters. He believed secrecy protected the family. Poirot nodded. And did he seem troubled? A flicker of pain crossed her face. Yes. 4 weeks. He stayed out late, met people in private, would not tell me anything. Did he mention Bassini? Her eyes widened slightly. Yes, once. He said it was dangerous. That he should have stayed away from it. Poirot exchanged a brief glance with Hastings. Madam, he continued, did Samuel fear someone? Evelyn clasped her hands tightly. Yes, she whispered. But he never said who. Section 3/ Adrian Van Leeuwen, the son. Adrian stepped forward sharply. You have no right interrogating us this way, Inspector. Poirot smiled politely. Mon ami, I interrogate no one. I merely ask questions. Adrian folded his arms. Look, I know how this works. You suspect the family first. Fine. But I adored my father. Everyone knows he was strict, but fair. Poirot tilted his head. Is it true that you and your father argued recently? Adrian froze. De Vries added quietly, we have statements from household staff who heard shouting. Adrian clenched his jaw. We argued about business. Nothing more. What aspect of business? Poirot asked. Adrian hesitated. Then, father was planning to pull out of a major shipping contract. I thought it was foolish. He said it was dangerous. I said he was paranoid. Poirot noted the detail. And this contract involved Bassini, no? Adrian's eyes flickered, that tiny flash Poirot never missed. Yes. Section 4/ Clara Van Leeuwen, the daughter. Clara sat near the window, her fingers twisting the edge of a handkerchief. Poirot approached gently. Mademoiselle, you loved your father very much, I see. She nodded, eyes glossy. He was strict, but kind to me. He protected me more than he should have. Protected you from what? From Rotterdam, she whispered. From its people. From its secrets. Poirot crouched slightly to meet her eye level. Did you see your father the day he died? Clara swallowed. Yes. In the morning. He looked nervous. He told me to stay inside. And then he said something strange. Poirot leaned in. What did he say? Clara's voice trembled. He said, if anything happens to me, do not trust the man in grey. Poirot and Hastings exchanged a sharp look. The man in grey. The same figure described by the dockworker. Poirot stood slowly. Merci, mademoiselle. You have helped more than you know. Section 5/ The Hidden Office. De Vries led Poirot and Hastings down the hallway into Samuel Van Leeuwen's private study. It was a room of dark oak and leather, filled with nautical charts, old ships in bottles, and a massive world map pinned with colored markers. Poirot examined the map. One mark stood out. A red pin at Basin E. Next to it was written, in Van Leeuwen's hand. Danger. Not to be trusted. Poirot moved to the desk and opened a drawer. Inside lay a torn contract. A photograph of a cargo ship. And a second copy of the circle/wave symbol. Hastings whispered, so he knew the symbol. Poirot tapped the papers thoughtfully. He knew it, feared it, and perhaps died because of it. He opened the torn contract. At the bottom was a signature line. The signature had been ripped off. But one word remained clear. Deswan Shipping Company. Hastings blinked. Deswan? Isn't that the ship mentioned in the smuggling rumors? Poirot nodded. Yes, Hastings. And I believe we are entering a web of lies, woven by hands that know the harbor better than anyone. Poirot folded the papers neatly. Inspector, we must go to Basin E tonight. Part 4, Shadows in the Harbor. Section 1/ Basin E at night. Rotterdam's harbor changed personality after dark. During the day, it buzzed with cranes, engines, and commerce, but at night, it became something else entirely. A world of silhouettes. Whispered shipments. Hidden movements. Men who preferred shadows over sunlight. When Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector de Vries arrived at Basin E, the entire dock felt strangely alive, as if watching them. Harbor lamps flickered along the water, casting long reflections that rippled like silver knives. Massive cargo containers formed towering walls, and the smell of oil and cold seawater hung heavy in the air. Hastings pulled his coat tighter. I say, Poirot, this place gives me the creeps. Poirot smiled faintly. That, mon ami, is because this place has seen much fear, and much crime. De Vries approached a security gate. This basin is restricted. Only certain ships and crews have access. Mostly high-value shipments, and occasionally, those with less honest purposes. Poirot's eyes scanned the docks. The symbol found on Monsieur Van Leeuwen, the circle with the slash and waves, it is linked to these shadows, I believe. De Vries unlocked the gate, and they stepped inside. Section 2/. The ship called Deswan. A low fog drifted across the water, revealing the outline of a ship docked quietly in Basin E. A black ship with a white swan painted on the bow. Poirot whispered. Deswan. The Swan. Gentle in appearance, deadly in purpose. Hastings frowned. Isn't this the same ship mentioned in the torn contract? Just so. The ship moored silently, as though pretending to be harmless. But Poirot felt danger radiating from it, a tension in the air, like the charged silence before a storm. De Vries studied the ship's manifest on his clipboard. According to the logs, Deswan brought in machinery parts from Hamburg. His voice darkened. That's usually code for contraband. Poirot nodded. And Samuel Van Leeuwen wished to pull out of this contract. Perhaps he discovered something dreadful. They approached the gangplank, but before they could board, a voice rang out. Stop! Who goes there? A man in a gray coat stepped from behind a container. Tall. Sharp features. Cold eyes. Hastings gasped quietly. The man in gray. The same description given by the dockworker. The same man Clara feared. De Vries called out, this area is under police investigation. Identify yourself. The man gave a thin smile. My name is irrelevant. And you, gentlemen, are trespassing where you do not belong. Poirot stepped forward calmly. We belong wherever murder is committed, monsieur. A small flicker crossed the man's eyes, not fear, not surprise, something colder. He slipped a hand into his coat as though retrieving something. De Vries tensed. Don't move. But the man simply pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He lit one slowly, took a drag, and exhaled. Then, with deliberate calm, he said. If you value your safety, you will leave this basin now. Tonight. Poirot's voice dropped to a razor whisper. And if we do not? The man flicked ash onto the ground. Then the river will carry more secrets tomorrow. And with that, he disappeared behind a maze of containers. Hastings exhaled shakily. Well, that was a threat. Poirot touched his mustache, eyes narrowed. No, Hastings. That was a promise. Section 3/. Inside the abandoned warehouse. They continued farther into the basin, toward a warehouse with a half-broken sign, 47. Poirot froze. The number 47. The same number written behind the symbol. This is the place. De Vries pushed open the heavy door. The warehouse interior swallowed them in darkness. Hastings fumbled for a flashlight. Poirot whispered, "Careful. This place is not abandoned, I suspect." Stacks of crates lined the walls. Each stamped DZS, Deswan Shipping. And below that, a small version of the circle/wave symbol. Hastings swallowed. They're everywhere. This is definitely connected to the murder. Poirot examined the crates. Some were sealed. Others partially open. Inside were machine parts, but beneath those. Poirot lifted a false layer. Beneath it lay small, velvet-lined boxes containing rare gemstones, antique coins, smuggled artworks, and one crate filled with engraved silver bars, each marked with foreign insignia. De Vries cursed under his breath. This is a smuggling hub. A massive one. Poirot nodded. And someone wanted Samuel Van Leeuwen to keep silent about it. Hastings asked, "But who runs this operation?" Poirot turned slowly. Someone with money, ships, connections, and a dark interest in Basin E. He paused when he noticed a metal cabinet bolted to the wall. "Inspector, help me open this." Inside the cabinet they found a ledger, photographs, and a sealed envelope marked VL. Poirot opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in Van Leeuwen's hurried hand. "If anything happens to me, the truth lies with the man in gray. And someone close to me. SVL." Hastings's eyes widened. Someone close to him? You mean, his family? Poirot closed the note softly. Yes, Hastings. Someone in the Van Leeuwen family is involved in this. Section 4/. The silent alarm. Before they could study the ledger further, a soft metallic click echoed from the back of the warehouse. Poirot stiffened. That was not machinery. De Vries raised his weapon. "You two stay behind me." A faint beeping noise began, slow, rhythmic, and ominous. Poirot's eyes widened. A silent alarm. Someone knows we are here. Suddenly, footsteps thundered above them, on the metal walkway. A shadow moved. Fast. Deliberate. Hastings shouted, "He's escaping." De Vries ran toward the stairs, but Poirot grabbed his arm. "No. He wants you to chase him. That path leads to a dead end." The inspector hesitated, and in that moment, the intruder fired a shot. A bullet ricocheted off a metal beam, sparking in the darkness. Hastings yelped. "Good Lord!" Poirot dragged him behind a crate. The shooter bolted for an upper exit door, slammed it open, and disappeared into the night. De Vries cursed. "We lost him." Poirot shook his head. "No. We gained something far more important." He held up the smuggling ledger. "This book contains every transaction. Every ship. Every name." Hastings stared. "Including the murderers?" Poirot's eyes burned with certainty. "Yes, mon ami. Including the murderers." Part 5, The Locked Room Intrusion. Section 1/. The Mysterious Office. The morning air in Rotterdam was crisp, with the faint tang of the river drifting through narrow streets. Poirot had insisted on returning to the Van Leeuwen mansion immediately. There was one location that had troubled him since the waterfront incident, Samuel Van Leeuwen's private office. The very office that had been locked the night he died, yet clearly someone had entered and tampered with crucial documents. The mansion appeared calm, almost serene, but Poirot knew better. Quiet often hid danger. Inspector de Vries led them to the office door. It was a tall, polished oak door with a massive brass handle and an intricate lock. Poirot circled the door slowly, examining every detail with the meticulous care of an artist studying a canvas. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot whispered, "the lock bears no scratches. No sign of tampering from the outside. Yet the documents have been moved. The question is simple, how did the intruder enter?" Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Simple. Poirot, it looks impossible to me." Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming. "That, my friend, is precisely the point. Impossible is only a word for those who do not think clearly. The little gray cells do not consider words like impossible." He pushed the door. "Locked." "Of course." Poirot removed a small tool from his pocket and deftly manipulated the keyhole. Within seconds, a faint click echoed. "See, mon ami. A simple key, and the world of deception opens before us." Section 2/. Inside the office. The office smelled of polished wood and faint tobacco smoke, even though Van Leeuwen had not been here in hours. Stacks of papers lay scattered on the desk. Some were original letters, some were invoices, and one small notebook seemed to have been deliberately removed and then hastily returned. Poirot knelt, examining the floor. His sharp eyes caught a faint scuff mark near the heavy rug. "Hastings, look here. Someone dragged this rug after entering. Observe the direction of the scratch on the floor. Not accidental. Calculated. Precise." Hastings bent to examine the mark. "You're saying someone walked backwards to hide their entry?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Exactly, Hastings. They wished to leave no trace. A clever hand. But not clever enough to hide all the clues." On the desk, a sealed envelope lay unopened. Poirot carefully broke the seal. Inside was a note in Van Leeuwen's handwriting. "If I am dead, the ledger is not enough. Look for the hidden drawer in my desk. Beware the man in grey, and trust only one among my household." Poirot tapped the desk gently. "A hidden drawer, Hastings. The very heart of the matter is often invisible. And here, it seems, it is also literal." Poirot traced his fingers along the edges of the desk. Finally, his hands paused on a small indentation invisible to the casual eye. He pressed it, and the drawer popped open with a soft click. Inside were papers, documents of shipping transactions, including shipments labeled Deswan. And a small key with a tag that read, Basin E, Container 32. Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, the web grows. Every clue links to the harbor, the man in grey, and now, potentially, the murderer among the family." Section 3/. The family's secret motive. Poirot summoned the Van Leeuwen family for questioning once again. This time, the atmosphere was tense. Evelyn Van Leeuwen had grown pale and weary, Adrian paced the room impatiently, Clara seemed almost ghost-like, her hands trembling at the edges of her dress. Poirot began with Adrian. "Mon ami, tell me about last night. Where were you when your father died?" Adrian straightened. "I was in my study. I told you, I argued with him, yes, but then I went to bed. Alone." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Alone, you say? Yet the intruder entered the very room your father used for secrecy. The ledger was disturbed, and the hidden drawer opened. It required knowledge, access, and courage. Do you have this knowledge, Adrian?" Adrian shook his head. "No. I don't understand. I wanted to protect the family business, yes, but I would never harm my father. How could you even suggest such a thing?" Poirot turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle, Your note mentioned a warning, the man in gray. Did your father ever speak to you about threats? About anyone suspicious? Clara whispered, voice trembling. He mentioned a figure. Always watching. Always near Basin E. But he never said who. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. The man in gray is real, and he has visited this house. But, perhaps he did not act alone. There is someone who could have given him access, knowledge of the hidden drawer. Someone close to the family. Hastings muttered. You mean one of them? Poirot nodded gravely. Exactly, Hastings. And the shadows of this family hide a motive darker than mere greed. Section 4/ A second intrusion. As they spoke, a sudden noise echoed from the hallway. A faint metallic click. Poirot froze. Hastings, we are not alone. Inspector de Vries moved forward cautiously. Poirot's eyes scanned the room. Then, a shadow passed by the window. Someone is watching, Poirot said calmly. Not just watching, planning. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A chair toppled over. Hastings stumbled. Poirot's gaze caught the smallest detail, footprints on the polished floor. They were light, feminine in shape, but hurried. A second intruder, Poirot observed. Someone smaller, someone who knows the layout of this mansion intimately. Perhaps Clara? Hastings paled. You're not accusing her, Poirot. Poirot shook his head. No. Only noting possibilities. In this game of shadows, appearances can deceive even the sharpest eyes. The intruder had left, but the room now carried a tense atmosphere. Poirot tapped his fingers on the desk. The intruder came to retrieve something. Perhaps the ledger. Perhaps the key. Perhaps both. But they left too quickly. They did not anticipate me. Hastings whispered, this is getting dangerous. Poirot smiled faintly. Danger is the spice of life, mon ami. And without it, the little gray cells grow lazy. Section 5/ The Psychological Trail. Poirot studied the room meticulously. Every detail of the intrusion offered a clue. No forced entry, intruder had a key or knew a secret. Hidden drawer accessed, knowledge of the desk's secret mechanism. Second intrusion, someone possibly connected to the family. Footprints, small, feminine, hurried, perhaps frightened. Poirot stood, hands behind his back. The locked room, Hastings, is never impossible. It is simply misunderstood. One must consider time, access, and human behavior. And in this case, all three reveal a truth. Hastings asked, what truth, Poirot? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The truth that the murderer is not only in the shadows of the harbor but also within the shadows of this house. And only when we combine both will we find justice. He picked up the ledger again. Tonight, Hastings, we visit Basin E. And we will see if the man in gray is bold enough to show himself once more. Part 6, The Woman in Gray. Section 1/ A Mysterious Arrival. The night in Rotterdam was thick with fog, curling through the streets and around the towering warehouses of the harbor. The city lights shimmered faintly on the river Maas, giving everything an ethereal, almost haunted glow. Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector de Vries returned to Basin E with purpose. The ledger from the locked room intrusion had revealed multiple suspicious shipments, but the real mystery, the identity of the man in gray, remained. As they crept along the dock, a shadow moved silently across the water's reflection. Hastings whispered, another intruder? Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings, observe the gait. Feminine. Light. Deliberate. Calculated. From the shadows emerged a woman dressed entirely in gray. Her coat matched the mist, blending her almost seamlessly into the fog. Her movements were precise, and yet there was a tension, a hidden fear, beneath her calm exterior. Poirot stepped forward, his hand raised in greeting. "Mademoiselle, may I ask your purpose here?" The woman paused. Her eyes glimmered under the dim light. "You should not be here, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. The truth is dangerous." Hastings muttered, "Dangerous? That's putting it mildly." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mon ami, danger is the path to revelation. Tell me, who are you?" The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "I am someone who once tried to help Samuel Van Leeuwen. But now, I am too late. He is dead. And the man in grey, he is relentless." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you? Are you his ally or something else entirely?" The woman hesitated. "Both. And neither. All I can say is, follow me. If you wish to understand what truly happened at Basin E. Section 2/ Secrets of the Past. She led them to a small, abandoned warehouse across the river. The interior was bare, save for a few crates and an old, dust-covered table. Once inside, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Isabelle de Vries. I knew Samuel Van Leeuwen before you did. He trusted me, perhaps too much. He confided secrets that even his family did not know." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what secrets, mademoiselle?" She reached into her coat and produced a small bundle of papers. Plans for shipments, coded ledgers, evidence of smuggling through Deswan. Samuel feared what would happen if the wrong people discovered these. Hastings leaned forward, studying her closely. "And this man in grey, he's the one responsible for Van Leeuwen's death?" Isabelle shook her head. "No. He is an instrument. But the true mastermind, someone far closer to the family, someone who had access to every part of the mansion and the ledger, someone who could manipulate the others without them knowing." Poirot tapped his mustache thoughtfully. "Ah, a puppet master hiding in plain sight. And the man in grey merely dances to their tune." Isabelle's eyes darkened. "Yes. And he is dangerous. He knows I survived. That I know things. That I could expose him." Poirot's gaze shifted to Hastings. "Mon ami, we are now in the midst of a psychological battlefield. Observe carefully. Every word she speaks, every hesitation, every glance, all contain meaning." Section 3/ The First Clue. Isabelle handed Poirot a small envelope. "Samuel entrusted this to me," she said. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside was a key, marked Container 57, and a slip of paper with a single word. "Trust no one." Poirot nodded gravely. "Merci, mademoiselle. Very good advice indeed." Hastings frowned. "A key, to another container? More shipments? Or, something else?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with comprehension. "Not just shipments, Hastings. Evidence. Proof. Perhaps even the identity of the puppet master." Isabelle stepped back, her eyes darting toward the river. "They are watching us. Always watching. If they discover I led you here." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then the little grey cells must act quickly. Mademoiselle, can you guide us to Container 57? She nodded. "Yes. But we must be cautious. The man in grey patrols the docks at night, and he is relentless." Hastings muttered under his breath, "Why do I feel like we're walking into a trap?" Poirot replied calmly. "Mon ami, traps often lead to truth. And truth, at last, is what we seek." Section 4/ Shadows and Pursuit. They moved through the fog toward the section of the harbor where Container 57 was stored. The night was unnervingly silent, except for the faint echo of water lapping against the hulls of nearby ships. Poirot held the key carefully. "The lock is as much a puzzle as the man who built it," he whispered. As Isabel approached the container, a shadow flickered behind a stack of crates. Hastings whispered, "There. It's him." Poirot observed calmly. "The man in grey, yes. But he does not yet know we possess the key." "Patience, Hastings. Observe and analyze." The man in grey moved slowly, as though aware of every sound. His steps were deliberate, silent, almost cat-like. He paused, scanning the docks, then vanished into the fog. Poirot exhaled. He is aware of our presence, yet unaware of our purpose. That is an advantage we must not waste. Isabel whispered, trembling. He will return. He always does. And when he does, we must be ready. Poirot's eyes were steady, unblinking. Mon ami, Hastings, the night is alive with shadows, and each shadow carries a secret. Tonight, we may uncover one. Section 5/. The revelation begins. They reached container 57. Poirot inserted the key carefully. The lock clicked open. Inside were crates, smaller than the usual shipping containers, each marked with the same circle/wave symbol. Poirot opened the first crate. Inside were documents, photographs, and ledgers, detailing smuggling operations through Rotterdam harbor. Names of accomplices within Van Leeuwen's shipping business. Evidence linking the man in grey to the wider network. Hastings muttered, "Good heavens, this is bigger than we thought." Poirot carefully examined a photograph, a meeting between Van Leeuwen, the man in grey, and someone whose face was partially obscured. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Hastings, observe the posture, the body language. That person is not a stranger to Van Leeuwen. They trust him. Or pretended to. Isabel's voice trembled. You see now, it is closer to home than anyone imagines. Poirot's gaze swept the dock. The fog seemed to thicken. The woman in grey has led us well. But the true danger, the true mind behind the tragedy, is hidden among us. And only careful deduction will reveal it. Part 7, The Harbor Gala Betrayal. Section 1/. The Invitation. Rotterdam's Grand Harbor Hall sparkled with chandeliers and polished marble, reflecting the city's wealth and power. Tonight was the annual Harbor Gala, a gathering of merchants, politicians, and dignitaries. The Van Leeuwen family, still mourning Samuel, were hosting the event to maintain appearances, but Poirot knew the gala was far more than a display of opulence. Hastings whispered as they arrived. Poirot, why are we here? Surely the harbor criminals wouldn't attend a polite dinner. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, appearances are often the mask of deception. The cleverest criminals enjoy the theater of the innocent. The gala provides the perfect opportunity to observe the guilty in plain sight. Evelyn Van Leeuwen greeted them stiffly, her black gown reflecting the candlelight. Adrian mingled among the guests with a forced smile, and Clara lingered near the grand windows, her eyes darting nervously toward the docks. Poirot whispered. Notice, Hastings, the tension behind each smile. Tonight, someone wears a mask of civility, yet carries treachery in their heart. We must watch carefully. Section 2/. The arrival of the man in grey. The orchestra played a soft waltz as guests mingled. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room. Then, he noticed a figure standing near the shadows of a balcony, the man in grey. He was calm, seemingly observing everyone, yet every movement was deliberate. Hastings muttered, he came to the gala. Bold, isn't he? Poirot nodded, whispering. Bold, yes. But he underestimates one thing, the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. The man in grey moved closer to the Van Leeuwen family, stopping near a shipment manifest displayed at a corner of the hall, a subtle way to remind Samuel's heirs of the ongoing threat. Poirot's gaze followed him like a hawk. He seeks to intimidate. To provoke. But he will not touch anyone tonight. Not yet, He is waiting for a distraction. Section 3 / The first attempt. As the gala continued, a waiter carrying a tray of champagne slipped past Poirot and Hastings. But Poirot noticed a glint in the tray, a small revolver, hidden beneath the glasses. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered. "The first strike." He tapped Hastings' shoulder. "Observe carefully. The weapon is meant for someone specific. Watch the guests, and note reactions." Before Hastings could respond, the man in grey made a subtle hand gesture. A young aide near the bar froze. The revolver was aimed at Clara Van Leeuwen, who had stepped too close to the display manifest. Poirot acted instantly, stepping between them and grasping the weapon. Hastings gasped, "Good heavens! You saved her." Poirot held the revolver with precision, careful not to discharge it. Mon ami, the hand that lifts a weapon often trembles with guilt, or fear. Observe him. The man in grey slipped away unnoticed in the chaos, leaving a trail of confusion and murmurs. Poirot whispered to Hastings. "Mark this, Hastings, he strikes only when shadows and distractions align. We must predict the next move." Section 4 / Clues in plain sight. Poirot began discreetly interrogating guests, weaving through the ballroom with subtle questions and sharp observations. He noticed a port clerk nervously sipping champagne, glancing at the Van Leeuwen family every few seconds. A shipping magnate from Hamburg with a handkerchief pressed tightly over his mouth, trying to hide anxiety. Evelyn Van Leeuwen herself, unusually tense, her eyes scanning the room as if anticipating something. Poirot whispered to Hastings. "Observe, Hastings, terror, fear, and deception are emotions that betray the guilty. Our man in grey is clever, but his accomplices are not." He stopped at a table displaying the gala's charity auction. Hidden among the documents was a folded piece of paper with the circle/wave symbol, confirming a connection to Deswan's illicit shipments. Poirot's eyes glimmered. The network extends into the very heart of this gala. And the circle/wave symbol confirms it. Whoever planned this knows our movements and our thoughts. Section 5 / The confrontation. Poirot's instincts told him the man in grey would strike again. And he did. As the clock chimed 11, the orchestra began a waltz. The man in grey approached Adrian Van Leeuwen, leaning close to whisper. Poirot noticed him placing something in Adrian's pocket, a small, folded note. Poirot moved swiftly, intercepting Adrian before he could read it. "What is this, mon ami?" Poirot asked, showing the note. Adrian stared blankly. I don't know. It was in my pocket." Poirot examined the paper. It contained a coded warning. "Leave the ledger. Or your family suffers next." Hastings whispered, "It's a threat, clearly aimed at Adrian." Poirot nodded. "Exactly, Hastings. But note the psychology, the man in grey is sending messages, controlling fear. He is cunning, but he is predictable in his obsession with manipulation." Poirot's gaze shifted to the man in grey, who had vanished again into the crowd. Poirot whispered. "Mon ami, the Harbour Gala has revealed much. Fear, intention, and subtle threats. But the final move tonight will expose more than just the accomplice, it may reveal the mastermind behind the entire web." Section 6 / A hidden alliance. As the night progressed, Poirot noticed a subtle interaction between Clara Van Leeuwen and a guest, a diplomat from Antwerp, whose demeanor suggested secret knowledge. They exchanged glances, almost imperceptibly, but Poirot caught it. Poirot mused quietly. Alliances are forming in the shadows. The man in grey may be a tool, but these alliances, these are dangerous. Someone is manipulating events from behind the veil of civility. Hastings muttered. "Poirot, it's like a chess game. I don't even know who the king is." Poirot adjusted his moustache, eyes gleaming. "Precisely, Hastings. And tonight, the first pieces have moved. The next move will either reveal the king, or endanger everyone on this board. Part 8, The False Solution. Section 1/. The Public Accusation. The grand drawing room of the Van Leeuwen mansion was packed with family, staff, and select harbor officials. The tension was almost tangible. Every guest had been warned that Hercule Poirot would reveal the murderer tonight. Poirot stepped forward, his hands folded, his eyes calm but piercing. Hastings, standing quietly behind him, could feel the electricity in the air. Poirot began deliberately. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have solved the tragic death of Samuel Van Leeuwen. The murderer, I believe, is Adrian Van Leeuwen." A gasp swept the room. Evelyn Van Leeuwen clasped her hands over her mouth. Clara's face went pale. Adrian himself froze, a flash of incredulity crossing his sharp features. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, are you certain?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon ami, certainty is a tool. Tonight, appearances must deceive. Observe reactions. The true culprit cannot resist the truth hidden in plain sight." He continued, recounting what seemed like compelling evidence: Adrian's arguments with his father, his access to the office, and the subtle behavioral cues he had displayed over the past days. Adrian protested, "I did no such thing." Poirot replied with deliberate calm. "And yet, my little grey cells tell me your motives were clear. You wished to control the shipping contracts. You wished to maintain authority over the family. And you had opportunity." Everyone in the room stared. Even Inspector de Vries looked uncertain. Poirot paused, letting the weight of his accusation settle over the room. Section 2/. Psychological Manipulation. Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Mon Dieu, this is risky. You're accusing the wrong man in front of everyone." Poirot smiled faintly, stroking his mustache. "Exactly, Hastings. The guilty party will never resist the lure of attention. The real murderer cannot tolerate an innocent person being accused. They will act, revealing themselves." Poirot's plan relied on psychology, a trap woven not with chains, but with pride, fear, and human instinct. He watched carefully as Adrian's face contorted in frustration and anger, but he maintained his composure. Evelyn Van Leeuwen whispered, trembling, "Adrian, is this true?" Poirot's gaze softened. "Madam, appearances are sometimes a cruel veil. Trust only the little grey cells, not what you wish to see." Section 3/. The Culprit Moves. As Poirot concluded the accusation, a small figure moved quietly behind the guests, the man in grey, bold enough to believe he was still undetected. Hastings spotted him. "There. He's coming for the ledger." Poirot whispered. "Exactly. Now, Hastings, watch the trap unfold." The man in grey attempted to reach the ledger displayed on a side table. But Poirot's subtle placement of the item in plain sight created a predictable path. The intruder stepped forward, hesitated, and then grabbed it, triggering a small mechanism Poirot had prepared earlier. A bell quietly chimed, alerting the room. Inspector de Vries sprang into action. The man in grey panicked, trying to flee through the crowd, but Poirot's keen observation blocked his escape. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Hastings, the bait has been taken. The trap works perfectly. Now we shall see who pulls the strings behind this mask." Section 4/. The Second Clue. While the man in grey struggled, Poirot calmly approached the ledger. Flipping through the pages, he noted discrepancies. Certain entries had been deliberately altered. Shipment codes misaligned. One signature repeated in a disguised hand. Poirot turned to the assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen, note the handwriting. Compare it carefully." Clara Van Leeuwen gasped softly. Poirot's gaze met hers. "Some of you knew more than you admitted. Some of you guided the man in grey. And some of you expected the blame to fall elsewhere." Hastings whispered, astonished, he's playing everyone, and nobody sees it. Poirot nodded. Precisely. The guilty always reveal themselves when they think their plans are working. Section 5/. The culprit exposed. Poirot stepped closer to Clara. Mademoiselle, you were the only one who had access to both the mansion's secrets and the shipping ledger. You feared discovery, and you manipulated the man in grey to serve your purposes. Clara's hands shook. She whispered, it was supposed to protect the family. Poirot's eyes remained steady. Ah, but protection taken to excess becomes murder, mon ami. You orchestrated your father's death to control the business. You used the man in grey as an instrument. And you underestimated the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. The room erupted in shock. Evelyn cried out, Adrian stepped back, and even Hastings could only stare. Clara sank into a chair, realizing her plan had collapsed under the weight of meticulous observation, psychology, and deduction. Poirot addressed the room. The accusation of Adrian was deliberate. It drew the true mastermind out. And now, the puzzle is almost complete. Section 6/. Lessons in Deception. After the chaos, Poirot turned to Hastings. Observe, Hastings. A false solution is sometimes the most effective solution. By directing suspicion where it does not belong, we force the guilty hand into action. And the guilty cannot resist their own vanity and fear. Hastings shook his head. You make it sound so simple, but it was brilliant. Poirot smiled faintly. Mon ami, genius lies not in strength, nor speed, but in patience and the mastery of human nature. Hastings added, so the man in grey was just a pawn. Poirot nodded. Exactly. But he is still dangerous. And our investigation is not complete. There are more secrets hidden among the harbor's shadows. Part 9, The Puzzle Completed. Section 1/. The Calm Before the Storm. The morning after the harbor gala, Rotterdam's harbor seemed deceptively calm. Mist lingered over the river, curling around the steel cranes and cargo containers. The previous night's revelations had sent ripples through the Van Leeuwen family, Clara's manipulation exposed, the man in grey revealed as a subordinate, and the ledger now secured under Inspector de Vries' careful watch. Poirot, Hastings, and the inspector walked along the pier. Hastings muttered, it's almost too quiet. Too peaceful. Poirot adjusted his gloves, eyes sharp. Mon ami, calm is often a prelude to danger. The true mind behind the puzzle may not yet have revealed themselves fully. And if we are not vigilant, the final move could be catastrophic. Hastings frowned. You mean there's still someone pulling strings? Poirot nodded. Exactly. Remember, the little grey cells see beyond appearances. Someone has orchestrated the entire series of events, the ledger, the threats, the manipulations. And now, with Clara exposed, the remaining pieces must align. Section 2/. Revisiting Basin E. Poirot insisted on returning to Basin E, the hub of smuggling operations. The fog hung thick over the water, muting sounds and shadows alike. The inspector led them to container 32, unlocked with the key recovered from Samuel Van Leeuwen's hidden drawer. Inside, Poirot observed crates labeled with the familiar circle/wave symbol. He opened one, revealing not just contraband, rare jewels, coins, and artifacts, but also a bundle of letters, unsigned but containing detailed plans and instructions. Poirot turned to de Vries. Observe, Inspector. These letters are written with care. But the hand is deliberate, practiced, and elegant. This is not the work of the man in grey, nor of Clara. This is the mastermind. Hastings asked, who else could it be? The mother? Evelyn? Poirot shook his head. Unlikely. She may have knowledge, but she lacks the cunning to orchestrate such a web. No, Hastings, someone with both intellect and influence, someone who could move unseen within the family business. Poirot paused, inspecting a letter more closely. Ah, now we see the pattern. The shipments, the threats, the ledger manipulations, all point to one individual who feared exposure, but who also feared loss of control. Section 3 / The mastermind's identity. Returning to the mansion, Poirot gathered the remaining household and staff. Poirot's voice was calm but firm. The person who orchestrated the death of Samuel Van Leeuwen, manipulated Clara, used the man in grey as an instrument, and almost destroyed the family business, is none other than Evelyn Van Leeuwen, the widow. Gasps echoed through the room. Evelyn's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Poirot continued. Evelyn had both motive and opportunity. She feared her husband would reveal financial mismanagement and smuggling connections that could ruin the family's reputation. By guiding Clara, she ensured control over the business remained in her hands. By using the man in grey, she created fear and confusion, masking her own actions. Hastings whispered, "I never would have guessed, the widow." Poirot nodded. Mon ami, the cleverest criminal is often the one closest to us, hidden behind trust and affection. She calculated every move with precision, but she could not predict the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. Section 4 / Confrontation. Poirot turned to Evelyn. "Madam, it is over. The deception, the manipulation, the murder, all of it is revealed. You may speak freely." Evelyn's voice was quiet but steady. "You are clever, Monsieur Poirot." "Yes, I acted. I did it to protect the family business, to ensure my children's future. But Samuel, he became reckless, threatened everything. I could not let him ruin us." Poirot replied softly. "Ah, madam, protection taken to murder is no longer protection. And justice cannot be evaded." Inspector de Vries stepped forward. "Madame Van Leeuwen, you are under arrest for the murder of Samuel Van Leeuwen and your role in the smuggling operations. Anything you say will be recorded." Evelyn remained calm, even composed. "You have bested me, Monsieur Poirot. But know this, even the little grey cells cannot undo every consequence." Section 5 / The harbour ledger revealed. Poirot returned to the harbour with Hastings and the inspector. "Now, Hastings," he said, "we must secure the ledger fully. The true mastermind has been revealed, but the evidence must be irrefutable. Only then can justice prevail." Hastings peered at the ledger, still open on the dock. "Poirot, all this trouble, and it all came down to one person's fear and greed?" Poirot nodded, his eyes on the water. "Precisely. Human nature is often the most complex puzzle of all. Fear, ambition, and desire for control, they create webs that even the strongest man cannot resist." He closed the ledger and handed it to Inspector de Vries. "Ensure this is delivered to the authorities. Let the law now complete its work." Hastings shook his head in awe. "You really can see everything, Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not everything, Hastings. But enough, always enough." Section 6 / Reflection. As the sun rose over Rotterdam, casting golden light over the harbour, Poirot and Hastings walked along the river. Hastings sighed. "So it's over. Clara, the man in grey, all pieces in place." Poirot nodded. "Oui, Hastings. But remember, every puzzle, no matter how solved, leaves a shadow of questions. The human mind is never fully revealed. We have solved this, yes, but others will always remain in the shadows." Hastings smiled ruefully. "And the harbour? The smuggling?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, reflecting the morning sun. "The ledger, the authorities, the vigilance of men like Inspector de Vries, justice, mon ami, is never simple, but it is precise when guided by reason and observation." And with that, they turned toward the bustling city, leaving the harbour and its shadows behind, for now. Part 10, The Final Confrontation and Resolution. Section 1 / The calm before the final storm. The evening air over Rotterdam's harbour was unusually still. The city lights reflected in the water, casting long shadows across the dock. Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector de Vries arrived early, the anticipation in Poirot's posture unmistakable. Hastings whispered. "Poirot, it feels as though the entire city is holding its breath." Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the empty warehouses. "Mon ami, the final act of a puzzle is always the most dangerous. Calm is the cloak of the guilty. Tonight, we will see who wears it, and who trembles beneath it." The ledger had been secured, Clara and Evelyn had been questioned, and the man in grey had been exposed as an operative. Yet Poirot knew one more confrontation was needed, a psychological and physical unveiling to ensure that the entire web of deceit was revealed. Section 2/. The trap at Basin E. Poirot arranged a trap at Basin E. The fog rolled across the docks, concealing movement, but Poirot's planning left no room for error. He instructed Inspector de Vries. "Place officers at each exit. The man in grey will attempt to retrieve evidence. He believes he is clever, but he underestimates us." Hastings asked, anxious. "And the widow?" Poirot's expression was solemn. "Evelyn Van Leeuwen will attend, as she must. She believes control is still hers. Tonight, her illusion ends." As night fell, the harbour was silent except for the distant lapping of water against the hulls of docked ships. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, noting every shadow, every movement. From the fog emerged a figure, the man in grey, cautiously advancing toward Container 57, unaware that officers lay in wait on all sides. Poirot whispered. "Now, Hastings. Observe his behavior. Watch for hesitation, for fear, for impulse." The man in grey hesitated at the container. His hand reached toward the ledger. Poirot's trained gaze detected the instant his brain recognized the trap. Panic flared. Hastings muttered. "By Jove, he knows he's caught." Poirot nodded. "Yes, mon ami. And yet, his fear will reveal the remaining threads of the mystery." Section 3/. The widow's true intentions. From a higher vantage point, Evelyn Van Leeuwen appeared, composed and regal, yet her eyes betrayed anxiety. Poirot spoke quietly to Hastings. "She believes she still commands the game. She does not realize that the trap is designed not just for the man in grey, but for her as well." Poirot called out in a calm voice. "Madame Van Leeuwen, please step forward. The web of deceit is complete. It is time for truth." Evelyn stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking against the dock's wooden planks. Her composure remained, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her inner turmoil. Poirot approached her, his voice gentle but unyielding. "Madam, your orchestration of events, the manipulation of your daughter, the use of the man in grey, all of it is revealed. There is no escape." Evelyn's voice was quiet, almost resigned. "You see too clearly, Monsieur Poirot." "Yes, I acted to protect my family, to preserve their fortune. But the cost was greater than I anticipated." Poirot replied softly. "Protection taken to murder is never true protection. Justice cannot be circumvented by love or fear." Section 4/. The final confrontation. At Poirot's signal, Inspector de Vries and his officers moved to surround the man in grey. The man realized the trap was fully sprung. His eyes flicked between Evelyn and Poirot, calculating, desperate. Poirot spoke deliberately. "You were an instrument, a tool, a shadow. You did not plan the murder. But you obeyed, believing loyalty would protect you. Yet the master behind you has been revealed, and your role is finished." The man in grey's shoulders slumped, defeated. He surrendered the ledger and the keys to the containers. Poirot turned to Evelyn. "Madam, the puzzle is now complete. You will answer for your actions, but your motive is clear, fear of exposure, desire for control, and misguided love for your family. Hastings muttered, "It's astonishing, the cleverness and the darkness intertwined so seamlessly." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, Hastings. And the little grey cells have once again illuminated what the human mind attempts to conceal." Section 5/ The Psychological Unraveling. Poirot gathered the family in a small room, away from the dock's chaos. Clara, though previously manipulated, now seemed relieved to know the full truth. Poirot addressed her gently. "Mademoiselle, your involvement was misguided, yet it stemmed from fear and love. It is essential to understand the boundaries of loyalty and the dangers of deception." Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. I never wanted this. I thought I was helping my mother protect the family." Poirot smiled faintly. The intention was understandable, but the consequences were grave. Fear can blind even the kindest heart. Evelyn, handcuffed but dignified, spoke quietly. "Perhaps, this was inevitable. Perhaps my cleverness was not enough to outwit truth." Poirot's gaze was steady. "Cleverness alone is never sufficient, madam. Justice requires clarity, observation, and the courage to see beyond the self." Section 6/ Resolution at the harbor. The officers secured the ledger, containers, and all evidence. Inspector de Vries thanked Poirot for his meticulous work. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, will the harbor ever be safe again?" Poirot adjusted his gloves, eyes scanning the shimmering water. "Safety is never permanent, Hastings. But vigilance, reason, and the application of truth ensure that justice is served, at least until the next puzzle emerges." As dawn broke over Rotterdam, the city returned to its daily rhythm. The harbor buzzed with cranes, ships, and commerce once again, unaware of the intricate web of deceit that had been unraveled the night before. Poirot and Hastings stood together, watching the sunrise over the river. Hastings said softly, "Another puzzle solved. Another truth revealed. But at what cost?" Poirot smiled faintly, contemplative. "The cost of understanding human nature, Hastings, is often the awareness of its darkness. But with understanding comes clarity, and justice." With that, they turned toward the bustling city, leaving the shadows and secrets of Basin E behind, the Rotterdam puzzle finally complete.